And let's go. Okay, that's it. You just run your hands over your clothing. Hello everyone, I hope you're well. So in this video I'd like to share with you my approach to shooting both videos and photographs during a wonderful fine art fashion event by a company called Walter's Wardrobe. Now Walter's Wardrobe events allow photographers to come together and work with wonderfully styled models in very grand venues. So photographers have the chance to work with the talent in their own style and in their own way during the day. I strongly suggest you check them out. I'll leave information and links down below. And if you ever get the chance to go to a Walter's Wardrobe event, I highly suggest you do it. So in this video, I'm going to cover the gear that I used, the camera settings, camera techniques, model direction, and post-production. Hopefully you'll find something useful and valuable within this video, and if you do, make sure you hit the like button, leave a comment and subscribe. And I also want to just use this opportunity to thank everybody that has subscribed and has left comments and is actually actively following my work on YouTube. I really appreciate your time and I thank you very much for your support. So first of all, my approach to the style of photographs and the style of video that I wanted to shoot. Now the models are already kitted out in the most beautiful dresses and outfits. The hair and makeup was fantastic. And the actual location was a very period style building. So it was without a doubt going to end up becoming something that was fine art fashion based anyway. My job really was to stay true to that kind of style. So I didn't want to be using any artificial light, or I didn't want to make anything look like it had been lit. There was lots of available light. Very big, high floor-to-ceiling windows, and wonderful soft light was flooding in through the rooms. Now let's talk about the gear that I used first for the photography. Now I shoot with the Canon 5D Mark III, and I knew that I wanted to create cinematic looking images. So in that regard, I knew everything would be shot in landscape. Therefore, I left the battery grip at home. I wasn't using any artificial light, so there was no need for triggers. And I decided I would give myself the challenge of taking one lens and one lens only and shooting everything on the day with that lens, the Sigma 35 1.4 Art. For me, the 35mm 1.4 is a storytelling lens. It really allows you to shoot a model or a subject, but also include enough background space to set a scene and create a narrative. And the aim was in all the shots to actually incorporate the wonderful background and the wonderful environment, because it was so key and so important to the narrative and the context in which we were shooting. Everything was shot in manual mode, and I was shooting between f1.4 to f2 depending on the scene. And I also centralized my subject quite a lot, because I really found it creates a really nice kind of fine art feel, especially when the model is directly center in the middle of the frame. Now when it came to shooting video, I took two lenses with my Panasonic GH5. That was the 14mm 2.5 and the 20mm 1.7. They're both small, lightweight pancake lenses. With them being super small and super light, I was able to shoot a lot of stuff handheld, but I also used the Zhiyun crane gimbal. With the lighter setup, it meant I could be more dynamic with my movement on the crane or handheld. And this was great, especially when I was shooting the dancing scenes. I was able to literally run around and dance around with the model and got these really nice dynamic shots. Now in terms of camera settings for the GH5, everything was shot on the day in 4K, 60 frames per second, 8-bit internal on the SD cards. I shot using a modified CINE Light D profile, and I will leave the profile settings in the information below. Now I chose to shoot in 60 frames per second because I knew I was going to slow everything down in post. And once I made that decision, it was very easy because I just put those settings in, I dialed in the CINE Like D profile, and then I didn't touch the settings after that. The only thing I was adjusting was the aperture and the ISO. And I shot with ISO from 400 all the way up to 1600. And I think the GH5 performed really well. The Zhiyun crane is a fantastic gimbal and it played a big part during the day. Although we have IBIS inside the GH5, there's still no substitute for using a gimbal for certain shots. The type of smooth dynamic movement you can achieve with a gimbal is very difficult to replicate handheld. So I was using a dolly in and a dolly out, and this could have been done from different angles. I was also using the slide technique, and the slide could also follow with a rotation. Some movements that I really enjoyed doing was actually craning upwards or using a pedestal movement upwards, whilst also using the joystick on the back of the crane to tilt the camera down or tilt the camera up. So if I was bringing the camera down using the gimbal, I was then tilting up with the joystick. So I was coming down and tilting up at the same time. And if I was lifting up, I was tilting the camera down, which again creates a really interesting, almost like a jib-like movement. I also used the roll in and the roll out function on the version 2. It's not a full 360-degree rotation, but it is a nice subtle rotation. And I made sure that in some of those shots, I also went totally out of focus on the lens. And that was an idea that just came on the day, and I thought it could be quite cool to use that somewhere in the edit.
Now let's just walk that way. Okay. Eileen, come this side to me, darling. I'm just going to follow you all the way. Okay. And as you walk, I just want you to run your hand on this banister for me.
It's filth.
It's okay. It's all part of the art.
Okay.
Yep, and face me. Oh! Damn!
Nobody, that's me.
That was going to be so good. Okay, just do a little turn there.
Before the day, and before I actually got to see what the models were wearing or exactly where they would be placed in the rooms, I already knew in my mind the 6 shots, fundamental shots, that I was going to make sure I got every time I worked with a different subject. And the 6 shots I'm going to give you now could be used in any kind of situation, with any model, with any kind of subject, in any kind of environment. So shot number 1 is an establishing shot, which shows the subject within the environment. Now the subject could be static, or they could be moving, or the camera could be static, or there might be some camera motion as well. But the idea behind this shot is it sets the scene and it tells the viewer exactly where we are and what the environment is like. The second shot for me was going in close and getting a portrait, and it was a close-up portrait which is going to show off the makeup and the hair and any kind of jewelry or accessories that the model is wearing. Now with the portrait shoot, I'm really looking at kind of like a head, neck and shoulders, and I would often crop at the top and just crop a little bit lower than the chest, just to give us that connection with the subject. Now these shots would also include eye contact and no eye contact, and also include dollying forward, backwards, or rotating around from side to side. The third shot is a close-up of the model's hands interacting with something in the scene. Now this could be either touching her own clothing or parts of her body. It could involve her actually touching any of the props or objects that are in the scene, but it does involve them actively doing something, and this is where you can follow the hands, you can track the movement, and you can just create a little bit of interest and interaction between subject and space. Shot number 4 is going to be detail shots and close-ups of the clothing and the costume or the fashion that the subject is wearing. If you're working with fashion designers, if you're working with fantastically talented stylists, you really want to show off all the fine detail and all the lovely features of a certain type of clothing or a certain style. And once again, these could be static shots or they could be movement. Now I often ask the subject, or the model in this case, to rotate or to move whilst I will stay static. Shot number 5 is shots of the model doing something a little bit more dynamic. So she could be dancing, She could be running, she could be moving in a very elegant kind of manner. It involves the model actually doing something which is quite visually interesting to look at. Shot 6 is environmental shots. You could call it B-roll, but I like to call it environmental shots, which involve you shooting things that are in the environment but not connected directly to the subject. So some decor on the walls, a piece of furniture, a wonderful chandelier, patterns on the ground, whatever it is, it just kind of ties in the story, but it also gives the viewer again a sense of space and where you are actually working. The models that we were working with on the day, they were absolutely fantastic. They weren't just modeling the clothing, but they were actually acting and playing the part of their characters fantastically well. So for example, the character that we have here, they have a very royal appearance, like the Snow Queen from Narnia. So the movement that was directed was to be very kind of strong and elegant. And at times the eye contact created this sense of strength and almost intimidation. And following on from this idea of a magical, powerful queen, I asked her to repeat a little sequence with her hands, almost as though she was going to create a spell or she was doing some kind of magic. I didn't know how I would use it later on in the editing, but I knew if I had it, it was something that I could incorporate into the final cut. Now, one thing that I found was really important, and I do this a lot when I work with models, is I give them time to get into a rhythm. I think it can be quite difficult if you keep stopping and starting a model during a sequence of events. It's far better to let them kind of play out a scene, a small sequence of moves or some kind of dance, and you take the time to shoot this from different angles and keep moving around your subject whilst they're performing. And also when working with the models, I wanted them to interact with any props that was specific to their room or to them as their subject. I'd made no decisions before the day of shooting how I was going to edit the video. I didn't even have the music selected at the time. And I think there's many videographers out there that have shot things and then come back later on and then new ideas have come to them about how to edit, and they've created something that they never planned for in the beginning. It took me a very long time to pick suitable music. I must have listened to about 60 or 70 different pieces of music until I finally found a piece of music that triggered new ideas. And I was laying there with the music on my headphones, and I could see the ideas coming together. The piece of music that I chose had a nice build-up. It started off quite soft and calm, and then it would gradually develop until it became very dramatic. And when I heard it, I felt it just fit perfectly with the decor and the clothing and the styling, the venue. It just was perfect. Now, once the music was chosen and put into the timeline, the next part was introducing the models, but I didn't want to do that straight away. I didn't want to start off by just showing the portraits of the models straight away. I wanted to kind of build up to that. So I thought it'd be a nice way to start by just shooting bits of the decor in the different spaces, and then moving on to showing the close-up details of the model's hand and the clothing. And as the music would change and develop, you would then see the portraits of the subjects. I really tried to match the movement and whatever the model was actually doing at the time to the intensity of the music. So as the music built and it became really intense, I made sure that whatever the viewers were seeing then was dynamic and powerful and had lots of energy. And likewise, as the music became softer and less energetic, I tried to use video clips that showed that kind of calmness. Now in terms of editing, it was pretty simple. Most of my editing is very much straight cuts or crossfades. So after all the timeline was created and all the cuts and everything was put in, the last important thing was how I would finish the video. And that's where those rolling out of focus shots really came in handy. Now as the music kind of petered out and softened, I used those out of focus rotational shots at that time. Now in terms of the colour grade, I simply used Adobe Premiere Pro's Lumetri colour panel. I used one of the creative LUTs and a few basic tweaks. I did the anamorphic crop bars above and below, and then a little bit of film grain over the top, and that was it. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any comments or any questions, please just leave them below. If you like the video, let me know. I'd like to make more of these videos on different shoots that I've done. And if there's anything that you've seen on my YouTube channel that you'd like to know more about, then again, just leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.